Soulmates, Richard Jefferson and Kendrick Perkins. We also have front office insider Bobby Marks and senior NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski. And coming up on NBA Today, Woj is going to peel back the curtain just a little bit on how Paolo Banchero became the #1 pick after all signs were pointing to Jabari Smith Jr. This is a fascinating story, but we do need to start with the basketball news of the day. And I want to be clear, this is the basketball news of the day. Kyrie Irving, because Kevin Durant, he released a podcast today, and here is some of what was said by KD on how involved he will be on Irving's impending free agency. So he said, there's no involvement at all. I can't be involved with this man's livelihood. This is much bigger than me. Being a free agent is one of the most important times in your career. That can't be swayed by anyone else. Nothing can happen right now. So I'm just going to let things play out, see where the chips fall where they may. It seems like that's what Kevin Durant is saying here. There's a lot to unpack, though, from those quotes. And don't worry, Perk, you're going to have the floor in just a little bit. But Woj, I do want to start with you here because you've been all over this story from the very beginning. Kevin Durant's basically saying out of this situation is out of his control. But what is his role in sort of all of this?
Well, listen, they went into free agency together 3 years ago and were very much connected in how they operate in free agency, came together, came to Brooklyn, got a deal for DeAndre Jordan at the same time, which when you look back didn't really make sense for where that franchise was, where Jared Allen was in his career. So they have impacted each other's free agency, and I do think Kevin Durant is going to impact, has an impact on how this goes with Kyrie Irving and the Nets. That's just how it goes in the NBA when players partner together to go play somewhere or make a decision either to leave or to go forward together. They're doing it in a very connected way. So I think a great deal of this Kyrie Irving story is influenced by Kevin Durant and whether or not Kyrie Irving leaving will push Kevin Durant to ask the Brooklyn Nets for a trade. That's what we are talking about here if Irving goes.
You know what's crazy that I saw in Kevin Durant comments was when he talked about, like, basically it's Kyrie's personal decision and he can't persuade a man to go in a direction. Well, somebody persuade you. You went sit down and you had meetings with Golden State. They persuaded you to leave Oklahoma City when y'all had meetings in the Hamptons. So you're telling me a guy that you call, quote unquote, your brother, that you don't have an impact on his decision making far as him whether or not he want to opt into his contract on the team that y'all chose to join together, and then all of a sudden you come out on the podcast and say, hey, you know what, it's his decision. It's the most important time of his life. First of all, this is not Kyrie's first contract extension or, free agency or whatever you want to call it. So I don't get what Kevin Durant is saying. I don't understand why Kevin Durant don't hold Kyrie Irving accountable. That's the crazy thing to me.
Well, I understand completely what you're saying, and I think when you look at the Brooklyn Nets situation, and I've been there a ton, when both players decide to go there, and then when Kevin Durant signed that extension, everybody was like, oh, okay, well, Kevin Durant, he's the first domino to fall. You're like, obviously there was James Harden, there was some other dominoes, obviously, that needed to go, but you're looking at this as like, oh, well, once Kevin Durant signed, everything else is kind of like,
It'll work itself out from
and
there.
what I respected when Kevin Durant signed early, he was like, hey, this is the franchise that I'm going to be with. We're going to stop any other nonsense. I want to be here. And then obviously, Kyrie, then the James Harden situation started to happen. And so you're still looking at Kevin Durant as you're that dude. This franchise hinges on every decision that you're going to make. And so, hopefully the Nets are having conversations with him saying like, hey, these are our options. If he leaves, what are you doing? Because KD could obviously impact his decision and say, listen, if he leaves, I'm leaving too. And now it's like, for me, if you're Kyrie, the fact that he's trying to stay out of it implies that he's more committed to the Nets than he is to Kyrie.
Well, and to be very clear, right, Kevin Durant, he signed that contract extension last offseason. Kyrie Irving and James Harden, there was questions about whether or not they would do so. They obviously did not. James Harden has since departed. So the question that sort of comes up in my mind, and I know, Woj, you've written about this extensively, is where exactly can Kyrie Irving go because of these various cap space situations? So what would that even look like, Bobby?
Well, I think the place he should go is Brooklyn.
The place he should stay.
I do. I mean, I think there's so much at stake for both sides here. I think there's so much at stake when you look at it from Kyrie Irving financially. what the alternatives are going to be outside of the Nets when you look at a lack of market for teams that have cap space. The likelihood is that a signing trade is likely off the table because of all these hard cap restrictions, how much teams are willing to give up in value. And I think there's a lot at stake for Brooklyn, right? We talked about the Kevin Durant factor. If Irving elects to go somewhere else, there's a domino effect here. And the last time I looked at it, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, a healthy Ben Simmons, Joe Harris, Patty Mills, what else they do in free agency, we can put that team up there with top 3 in the Eastern Conference. So there's a lot of consequences here that everyone has to realize what the consequences are going to be.
I think the concern right now for the Nets organization is negotiations. Listen, people try to gain leverage. If you're Kyrie Irving, you are trying to get the Nets to give you a longer-term deal with more guaranteed money than they want to give. The Nets are trying to go in the other direction. Shorter deal, incentivized, because he just hasn't been on the floor as much as they'd like the last couple of years. This is getting acrimonious. And I think that's the concern when you look at not just Kyrie Irving's future in Brooklyn, but Kevin Durant's future and whether they can hold this thing together right now.
Absolutely. I do just want to pull up the list of teams that WOJ reported that Kyrie, he sort of has a wish list that he could potentially see himself fitting with if he and the Nets can't come to an agreement on this situation. You can see the full list here, but I want to be very clear. One part of your reporting, Adrian, was that this is the list that Kyrie Irving would like. That's not necessarily, I would like a whole bunch of things that don't necessarily come to fruition at any given moment. I would have liked to have, a full day off. Some things don't come to fruition.
The interest isn't mutual.
Okay, that's all I wanted to hear.
The interest isn't mutual in several of these places, and obviously the Lakers are the ones that loom. And will Kyrie Irving walk away from a $36 million player option this year that he can just opt into and have that money guaranteed, especially after a year when he lost about $17 million by not being vaccinated last year, and untold more with a sneaker deal that isn't going to be there for him anymore, maybe at the level it was. So financially, and as Bobby's documented well, the Lakers, except for if they go out and really do some creative things financially, they can't pay him any more than $6 million next season. Now they could clear cap space and sign him to an extension down the road, but you're essentially looking at a $30 million plus pay cut to walk away from this Brooklyn team to opt out. And as Bobby said, just opting in and hoping to get a sign and trade somewhere, it's a very complicated scenario.
Well, one, how can Kyrie Irving have the audacity to have a wish list, right? Like, how can you present an organization that you have been disrespectful to since the time you have arrived, not showing up to practice, not sending out a text or giving people a phone call, disrespecting your head coach, disrespecting your teammates at times. And then on top of that, right, we all think, and Bobby, that was a great point, about the right thing for Kyrie Irving to do is to sign back to Brooklyn. We all know the right thing, but when we go right, Kyrie Irving goes left. So now you got to put yourself in Kyrie Irving's mind and his brain. And he don't really care about a lot of things that we're talking about, saying, the common sense to tell you, opt into your contract, play with Kevin Durant, make $30+ million next season, don't turn that down, or go play with LeBron James for $6. I think he should actually go play with LeBron James, to be honest with you. When I look at it, when he was playing with LeBron in Cleveland, their playoff record was 39-13. We haven't really seen Kyrie Irving play consistent elite basketball at a high level for a long period, expanded period of time since playing alongside LeBron James.
Well, I mean, in a perfect world, Kyrie Irving is a max player.
Yeah.
But on a year-to-year basis. I mean, and you know how the NBA works. Like, Brooklyn's trying to do something that's unique, signing a player to a max contract on a short term, or maybe games played in years 3 and 4, incentive based on the end. And if you're Kyrie Irving, you're looking at still like the player that was in Cleveland, that was in Boston, that is a 4 or 5 year guy, and there's not many options out there for him. There's not many teams that are willing to commit 4 years to him. Even if in a sign-and trade, the sign-and-trade rules is that it's a minimum of 3 years in a deal. Like, you can't do a sign-and-trade and say it's a 1 year contract. So there's a lot of complexities to it. But as I said, he's a max player, but on a year-to-year basis.
And we know that if Kyrie Irving plays for the Nets this year, plays 70 games, makes a deep run in the playoffs.
You already know what it is.
The following year, if he doesn't want to play in Brooklyn anymore, there will be teams who will create the salary cap space. There will be opportunities for him that aren't there right now.
Well, and this is the one thing that I want to make sure that is very clear. Kyrie is always allowed to go do whatever he wants. Kyrie is in a position where if you do not want to get vaccinated, fine. If you want to maneuver in a certain way and you want to take time off, but what happens when you do that is right now, this is when teams get their get back. This is when teams get their get back. Kyrie and everybody can do whatever they want until it's time to get paid. Now you're saying, I want max money for multiple years. And it's like, well, you're always trying to earn your next contract. And so if you were Kyrie Irving and you were the owner of a multi-billion-dollar team, would you give yourself a max contract? Because it's not based off talent anymore. It's based off of production. And production is when you're on the court and what happens, how you lead a franchise as an organization. So for me, Kyrie doesn't deserve it because he hasn't put himself in that spot. But is he one of the most talented players we've ever seen? Yes. Yeah. Is he a max player with a max contract? Yes. But if this is how your last 2-3 years have gone, you're not going to get it when it's time for the team to be like, okay, you can have that, but now it's our turn to be like, no more.
Right. And there is no deserve. It's what you can get
what
in
you
the
earned.
Marketplace,
Yeah.
right? And so, listen, if there were big market teams right now who had significant salary cap space, I think there might be a number of them who would still be willing to do that with Kyrie Irving. But the Knicks, who are trying to create salary cap space, they've got a target in Jalen Brunson. And maybe a level of confidence they can go out and get him. They know who he is. The relationships and history with the people in New York are pretty unique and really strong. That's where they're making their run. We know if the Lakers had a bunch of salary cap space, if they had traded Russell Westbrook's contract into Oklahoma City's cap space and gave up picks and had the space, they would do it.
You know what's the crazy thing, though? Kyrie Irving could have got the money that he wanted because we all know that it was supposed to go Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving all was supposed to sign their extensions before the season started. And then who messed it up? Kyrie Irving.
Well, I do think, though, that's one of the reasons why we're talking about Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving being intrinsically linked. When Kevin Durant is talking about the fact that this is a grown man who needs to make his own decisions because it was a joint decision to then come to Brooklyn together, that's why these questions are coming about whether or not then there would be an exit at the same time. Bobby, before we go to break, what would a package, I mean, and this is purely hypothetical, if we're looking at Kevin Durant, what would a package even look like?
I think if you're Sean Marks, you look at the top 25 players under the age of 25 and say, do I want a Zion Williamson? Do I want Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton? I'm just hypotheticals here. That's the players I'm looking at as far as just going down. Am I looking at Memphis's roster with all those young players outside of Ja Morant? You're not looking for players in that, DeMar DeRozan and, Nikola Vucevic. You're looking at young players to build around.
And what would make a potential Kevin Durant trade really unique is he's got 4 years left on his contract. And that makes virtually every team in the league willing to get involved. Again, because if you trade for him, he has to play for you. He's got to perform. And so it opens up the when a player's got 1 or 2 years left, you're limited. Teams in small markets know if we trade for him, he's probably going to walk.
The only question I have is, if Kyrie does opt out and go someplace else, what are the options that the Brooklyn Nets have to then pair Kevin Durant up with someone in free agency or something? Like, are their options completely gone if he leaves?
You're right at the salary cap.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where you're looking at. You have Ben Simmons and Durant combined to make $80 million. Joe Harris, the list goes on as far as where you're at.
They need to get Patty Mills to opt back into his contract. That's an important factor for this Nets team.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this all so fascinating. We will continue to be monitoring this situation closely. We still, though, have a lot to come on NBA Today, including
in the 2022 NBA Draft, the Orlando Magic select Paolo Banchero.
Who gon' stop me now? I wanted to be in the NBA, but I didn't know I would be here. I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna do what I do, and I expect to have a great year. I'm ready. You know that I'm number one. There'll never be another one.
Welcome back to NBA Today. So no one was surprised, right, by the players that were selected in the top 3 of last night's draft, but the order that they were picked in, that's what raised a couple of eyebrows. So Woj, can you peel back the curtain a little bit for us on the process for the Magic and how they landed on Paolo Banchero?
Listen, Orlando orchestrated one of the great stealth pre-draft processes that this league has seen in a long, long time. I think there was a time in this league when it was less of an information age where you could do this. But in this era, to keep something that quiet and to keep everybody believing you were doing exactly something else, it earned the respect of a lot of teams in the league, including the teams at number 2 and number 3 at number 4, who until about 7:30 last night when we said, hey, Paolo Banchero may be the first pick in this draft, and as we got closer to 8 and we had more confidence he was their pick, you know, those guys all had a sort of, now you prepare for these in a draft room, Bobby knows this, you prepare for all the scenarios where, you know, it may not go exactly how we expect it to, and we know what our response to that would be. But I think for Orlando, they knew that other teams valued Jabari Smith Jr., Chet Holmgren more than Paolo Banchero. They believed Paolo was the best player in the draft. And I think by allowing people to think that it was really Jabari Smith versus Holmgren, it would open up more trade calls. And that maybe they could have moved to 2nd or moved to 3rd with a great package and still gotten Banchero there. It's essentially what Danny Ainge did with Jason Tatum and Markelle Fultz.
But then you run the risk, right? Then that's the risk as far as if he's your guy, just take him.
And they did.
Right?
And
just take him.
And ultimately, we saw that that's what happened. But even Paolo said at one point, he got a call from his agent, he said a little bit before the pick came in, but he still couldn't believe it. He wasn't necessarily thinking that that's where he would go.
Listen, I think Jabari Smith Jr. and his group, they were very confident they were going number 1, and they had reason to believe. Chet Holmgren and his group, they thought Jabari was 1, and they were 2. And one thing, Sam Presti in Oklahoma City, you know, you could say, hey, we're getting the guy we want at number 2, which no one will ever know if Jabari Smith went number 1. Well, when Banchero goes number 1, you go, okay, do you really have that conviction on Chet Holmgren? Because now you can get Jabari Smith.
Go ahead.
No, and I think that's something that you're preparing for, right? You put every possible scenario. What if Banchero goes, and we're staring at Holmgren and Jabari Smith at number 2. You know, that's not something that happens at 7:45. That's part of the process there.
And even further down, Detroit at number 5, those teams all expected Jaden Ivey to go number 4, and Sacramento moved to Keegan Murray, and all of a sudden there's Jaden Ivey there for the Pistons at 5.
Well, and to add to what you were saying, I talked to Jabari Smith Sr. because we played together. He had a short stint with the Nets.
Oh, I got to start. That's for another show.
That's my guy.
It's all PG. Trust me, it's all PG.
Jabari Smith Sr. That's my guy. We played against each other in college, and so when he had his stint with the Nets, and so I got to see him last night, and I was just asking him how he feel. I was happy for him. He was like, he's like, my guy's gonna go number 1. Like the family, everybody thought it was number 1 an hour before the draft even got started.
Except for the agent.
Except for
Wallace Prather, who came up to me while we were getting mic'd up. He said, hey man, let me holler at you for a second. I said, don't you got Jabari Smith Jr.? I said, yeah, he going number 1, right? He was like, I hope so. I can't trust him, though. I don't know.
Well, see, but here's the thing that Jay Billis has said repeatedly is that on any given other draft, these are 3 guys in Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero, and Jabari Smith Jr. that could have gone number 1 at any given moment. And so now sort of what we're looking at is a team, several teams that have these impressive young cores. And Bobby, this was your job, to build rosters from the ground up. When you were looking at these young cores, particularly at the top of the draft, who do you see as the most potent and talented?
I think certainly New Orleans, right? I mean, when you added Dyson Daniels, you have Brandon Ingram, a healthy Zion Williamson, Herb Jones, who you picked in the 2nd round last year. That's a nice infrastructure of players that have shown can play in big games, playoff games. Ingram, and then with C.J. McCollum and Jonas Valanciunas. That's a strong group of players.
I like it.
I got to go with OKC. I think Sam Presti did his thing yesterday, and knowing who they already have, you look at SGA, and then you have Josh Giddey, who played well before he got hurt last season, and then you add Chet, right, the guy that you wanted, along with going to get 2 more lottery picks, right? You get Jalen Williams, and then you get Hassan Jane. Did I get that right?
Usman
Jane, right?
Close.
So
Close. Nice
I tried. I almost did, right? So you get 3 lottery picks to go along with what you got already, and most importantly, not only did you get your guy, but you got 2 wings, and I kept talking about the wing position, the most important position of the game today.
Listen, the Thunder are not going to hit on all these guys, and I don't think they expect to. But when you get as many picks as they do, you don't have to hit on them all. You have to hit on a few of them. And so they need Chet Holmgren to be a transcendent player, because it's one thing to have lots of draft picks at 11, 12, 13, 6. You've got to be up in the top 3 to get that kind of a superstar. They think they've got it in Holmgren.
Yeah, well, the same thing happened when Philly, when they were in that super tank. People look at Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons and say, oh, look at those guys. And it's like, there's a whole laundry list of guys that did not work out for them. But what I look at is I look at Cleveland, and it's because you've got 2 young all-stars, and Jared Allen and Darius Garland. Obviously, Evan Mobley, who was my pick, sorry, Scotty, for Rookie of the Year. You got Isaac Okoro. You got so many young players there, and they were so close to making the postseason, other than, the injuries that happened to them late. So they added, and I'm not going to even do what Perk did. What's his name?
Ochai Agbaji.
Ochai Agbaji. We're going to figure out that name. So if he can contribute anything to this already growing young core, it's going to be impressive.
Smart move last night in Cleveland, drafting Evan Mobley's older brother.
That's the other part. That showed you how important Evan Mobley is. And they're like, we're going to do anything very similar to what Giannis has as his brother. We're going to do everything because he is the future of this organization and maybe the league, in my opinion.
You named the 2 young all-stars, Darius Garland, Jared Allen last year.
Yeah.
Evan Mobley's going
to
be the franchise player there.
Well, and you mentioned Giannis Antetokounmpo. We will be hearing from the Antetokounmpo family later in the show. Still to come on NBA Today, who are the winners and losers of the draft? Our panel gives out some superlatives. That's coming up next. Plus, speaking of the draft, the Knicks. They were busy, to say the least, last night, so we get into what their grand...
Kyrie, which team makes the most sense? You mentioned the Knicks or the Lakers. Which one?
I mean, look, the Knicks make the most sense because they do have the ability to get the cap space necessary to sign Kyrie Irving now that they've made these trades, right? They've got 11 first-round picks the next 7 years. They can move picks around, move $20 million or so, and sign it. Obviously, he could go to the Lakers and reunite with LeBron if he's going to take $30 million less. Now, he did give up $17 million last year to not get vaccinated and not play, so you have to at least consider the possibility that he's willing to do that. But outside of that, I don't think any of these other teams really make sense. I mean, you could really do like some galaxy brain stuff and talk about trading James Harden back to Brooklyn for Kyrie to like completely set the world on fire. But I just think in general, none of these moves really make sense on this list for teams to try to come up with a trade that makes sense for the Nets. And I think ultimately, my guess is he ends up back in Brooklyn. But that's one fit, it's the Knicks.
Legs, of all the teams, just purely on court, where's the best fit?
I think either the Heat or the Clippers, if we're going to put this thing in a vacuum and act like this can actually happen. I just look at what Miami really needs, which is they need more offense creation on the perimeter. You have Jimmy Butler, you have Tyler Hero as their main guys, and Tyler Hero was limited. I know he was hurt. I know he had other issues, but even before that, he was not the same player in the postseason that he was in the regular season when he won 6th Man of the Year award. So they were so reliant on Jimmy Butler offensively to carry that load. They need more there. And then I also look at a team like the Clippers, and you see all these things on paper. You don't know what any of them are realistic or not. But one that had the Nets getting back guys like Marcus Morris and Norman Powell or Robert Covington or Luke Kennard, I'm saying to myself, man, if you got KD and you got Ben Simmons and you bring in some guys that are two-way players that can score, spot up, shoot threes, and they love to defend, does that make the Nets even better if they were able to do that and Kyrie goes and plays with 2 other stars and gives him a realistic chance at winning a championship? I mean, if you're asking me to just play fantasy world, those would be the 2 teams, I think, on paper. I have no idea why Dallas was on that list. Kyrie Irving playing alongside Luka Doncic, who dribbles the ball for 90% of their possessions. I do not understand why that would be on Kyrie Irving's wish list at all.
Well, I mean, listen. He gave the ball to Harden and said, you're the point guard. He's really an off guard in a point guard's body, Kyrie, maybe. So maybe he's thinking something like that, or maybe it's all just a leverage play. Real quick, Legs, Are any of the teams you mentioned a better situation than the Brooklyn Nets? KD, Ben Simmons, a healthy Joe Harris, Seth Curry. Are any of those teams better situations than the team he's on right now, who can also, by the way, offer him the most money?
Yeah, no, I don't think any of those situations are better also because there's also something in place that he doesn't necessarily have anywhere else. He already has this bond and this relationship with Kevin Durant. You know, by all accounts, these guys are really tight. And I think collectively they can view this as, hey, we haven't come close to delivering on what was expected of us when we put this thing together. James Harden's already gone, but now, and we both went through injuries, if we come back and we're healthy and you're adding Ben Simmons to the mix in the different ways that he can help you, and he's got some offensive limitations, and we all need to see where he's at in terms of, mentally, is he in a good place now to go out and ready to play and compete? But assuming he is, that is the best situation for him. And also, I think the situation that can be the most redeeming if he is actually able to win with Kevin Durant. For both of those guys, they've got a lot of motivation to make that happen in Brooklyn.
To your point, Legs, obviously there's a lot of stuff that has to be sorted through here, but just from a basketball fit standpoint and from an overall roster standpoint, I'm with you. The Nets situation is the best situation for him, but obviously there is a
only surprise in the NBA draft. Who got it right and who got it wrong last night? Kyrie Irving upped the stakes in his contract standoff with the Nets yesterday. Now KD has weighed in what Kevin Durant said and why Brooklyn is playing with fire. And speaking of playing with fire, Aaron Judge has been the best baseball player on the best team in the world, and my Yankees are nickel and diming him. What Bombers now have to do to keep him in the fold. Let's go. What's going on, everybody? I'm Max Kellerman. Welcome to This Just In, a fast hour around the world of sports and how I see it. That is Tim Bontemps, and we start with the NBA draft. Paolo Banchero, indeed, went 1 overall to the Magic. He's the 4th Duke player in the draft's modern era to be the first pick off the board, joining Elton Brand, Kyrie Irving, and Zion Williamson. Of course, Jay Will would have been too. He happened to be drafted with Yao Ming, who's a 7'6" center. Chet Holmgren was taken 2nd by the Thunder. He is now the highest drafted player to come from Gonzaga in the modern draft era. Adam Morrison went 3rd in 2006. At number 3, the Rockets selected Auburn's Jabari Smith Jr. Houston has not drafted an eventual All-Star since the aforementioned Yao Ming in 2002. That's the longest active drought for any franchise. I am with the Tims today. Not only Bontemps, but Legs, there he is. But Bontemps, let me start with you. Was it a surprise to you that the Magic, first Banchero was favored to go 1 overall, then all of a sudden we're hearing he's not, and then was it a surprise to you that he went a 1 overall?
It had to be somewhat of a surprise, Max, given that we thought most of the day yesterday it was going to be Jabari Smith. I think mostly those was just a strange situation, right? The Orlando Magic had the number 1 pick. It wasn't like they had to worry about deking someone out to get
why the mystery?
That's what I mean. That's the thing that's strange about it. It's like they kind of went through this whole charade and then drafted him at the end. Maybe they were trying to get Houston to trade up for him. There was a lot of talk that Houston was really enamored with Paolo and was going to take him 3rd if the Magic took Jabari Smith with the 1st pick. Maybe they thought Houston might want Jabari Smith and try to make a big trade offer there. I guess that's the only way I could think about it. Otherwise,
or maybe they really weren't sure.
I mean, maybe they weren't, but it was just a strange thing the way it all played out that way.
Legs, what kind of fit do you see Banchero with the Magic? Is that a good fit?
It's a great fit wherever he went. I think he's the most NBA-ready prospect. I love Jabari Smith, too, and he's going to be a can't-miss player in this league with that shooting stroke and defensive versatility. But Banchero, I think day one, puts on an NBA uniform and is a highly productive player because he's got the size, the lower body base to be able to play at that league right now. And the thing that really impressed me, the more I saw him throughout the season, was his open floor ball handling, and he's a great passer in the half court. Now, eventually, if he wants to become a legitimate superstar as a number 1 pick, he's going to have to go ahead and add deep 24-foot NBA three-point range. Right now, that's a mixed bag for him, but eventually, there's no question, the stroke looks good enough to extend that range. So I think no matter where he went, he was my favorite player in this draft, and I think the most likely to have an immediate impact early in the season as a rookie.
To Leg's point, I think Paolo Banchero is going to be the Rookie of the Year. I think I don't want to say a lot because you never know with health, but he's going to have the ball in his hands all the time. The Magic needs somebody to produce. Like Tim said, he can put the ball out in the open court. He can do a lot of stuff. I think if you're looking ahead to that, I think he's the clear favorite to win Rookie of the Year.
Jabari Smith, the one thing about him is his floor is very high because he can shoot the lights out and he can defend and he's big, right?
Yep.
But maybe a little less upside than someone like Banchero or Chet Holmgren. So, Tim, who had the best night?
I mean, look, I think the Rockets did really well. I really like Jabari Smith. I think he's got a chance to be a heck of a player. You mentioned his shooting stroke. I think with his defense, he could fit in really well with Jalen Green. They also get Tari Eason from LSU with the 17th pick. He's one of the best defensive players in the draft. With a team that doesn't have a lot of guys that like to guard on it, he could immediately step in and have a big impact. The other team I really liked, though, was the Detroit Pistons. Getting Jaden Ivey with the 5th pick, a super athletic kid, a great fit with Cade Cunningham, and then making this trade with the Knicks, which I'm sure we'll talk about your Knicks later. Getting Jalen Duren.
I'm not a Knicks fan.
Getting Jalen Duren, a really athletic big guy. They've been talking about them being interested in DeAndre Ayton. Now they go forward with this group of 5 young guys: Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Sadiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart, and Jalen Duren. That's a pretty exciting young core for the Pistons moving.
All right, just for clarity, your Bontemps, your legs. I can't say Tim. Everyone's going to answer at once. Legs.
Right.
What do you make of the movement from the Knicks last night? Bontemps just brought it up, claiming I'm a Knicks fan. He's wrong. I was in my younger days, back when they were a normal organization or more normal. Anyway, what do you think about what the Knicks did?
Yeah, like I was an Orioles fan growing up, but it's been so long since they were relevant, I don't really care that much anymore. So I hear what you're saying.
Right.
Listen, here's what they ended up doing. It looks like they want to try to create some space in case this Kyrie Irving thing can pan out, which I don't think it will, or to create space for Jalen Brunson to sign him. That's a lot to do with why they don't have Kemba Walker anymore. Look, if you're looking at those two players, Jalen Brunson is a really good player. I don't think Jalen Brunson is a difference maker to put with that group and think now they're going to be a contender in the Eastern Conference with those teams at the top. Milwaukee and Boston and Miami come to mind. And for Kyrie Irving, look, I think we saw the experiment of what that looked like when Kyrie Irving was asked to be the leader in Boston. It's not a role that he really relishes. He wants to just go ball and play, and that's not the place you go if that's what you want to do. You're going to get asked a lot of questions. You're going to be asked to be the leader in that market. There's a lot of accountability, a lot of scrutiny, and you've got an entire team to uplift when you're the top guy. That has not been a comfortable place for Kyrie Irving. So I know why the Knicks would want him. I just don't know if ultimately that would play out the way that they would envision if they do get Kyrie.
So, Bontemps, what does this mean for the Knicks going forward now?
Well, to Tim's point, Leon Rose, the team president, put out a statement today talking about what they did. And the first thing he said was this increased our financial flexibility. It was very clear to me by moving on from Kemba Walker, by getting all these draft picks. It took me an hour to figure out exactly what the Knicks did last night. But once I did, it seemed clear to me the goal was we have to have the ability to create more cap space going forward this summer and beyond. Now, to Tim's point, Leon Rose was Rick Brunson, Jalen's father's, that was his first client. He now works for Tibbs. He's worked for Tibbs for a long time. Sam Rose, Leon's son, is now Jalen's agent. There's all sorts of connections there. You have that obviously has been a target for the Knicks for months now to maybe get Jalen Brunson. And I do think with the amount of moves they made, they do have the ability to go get Kyrie Irving now if they want to do it. They can create the cap space to go sign him. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I still think it's more likely than not he ends up back with the Nets. But for all the things that we've talked about, all the various destinations we've talked about with Kyrie, where he could go, this is the one realistic place for him to go, other than signing for $6 million with the Lakers, where he can go there without the Nets having to cooperate. So it makes it a factor to me.
When I think about all the names attached to the Knicks, at least the fans and the media are talking about Jaden Ivey. No, that's not going to happen now, right? And he goes to Detroit where he wanted to go. We've heard of Malcolm Brogdon. We hear Kyrie. It sounds like Brunson's the most realistic. And they're moving heaven and earth to get Brunson. He's a 6'1" guard who doesn't shoot the lights out, right? Unless this is a James Harden thing where a guy like Daryl Morey identifies, people know he's good, he's better than people think. What are they doing? All right, look, let's get to the Nets and Kyrie Irving specifically. Kyrie has created a list he'd like the Nets to consider working with on a sign and trade if he can't agree to terms to stay in Brooklyn. He has until Wednesday to decide whether he will opt into the final year of his contract. If Kyrie can't reach an agreement to stay with Brooklyn, he has a list of teams he'd like them to consider, right? Okay, here they are. Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, Heat, Mavs, 76ers. None of those teams have cap space to sign him without the Nets' help. All right. Bontemps,